Thank you for joining us today concerning evidence-based interventions. My name is Brook Meiller, and I'm here with my colleague Lorraine Eldrenkamp to walk you through some help in determining how to find the best interventions to help with your improvement plans, but also just overall how we can use research to help us choose the best programs and practices for our students. When we think about the ESSA tiers of evidence, this is really talking about how we can, as leadership teams, take the guidance in ESSA and translate that to choosing the best interventions for our students. We have created this presentation in conjunction with Rail Southwest, and we're happy to bring that to you today. So our objectives are really to identify the requirements for selecting evidence-based interventions and practices. And for the sake of the word intervention, we tend to think in education, because this is the way we've used the word intervention, that it means something that you do after the first set of instruction and then we intervene, as in a tiered intervention system. However, ESSA really means intervention and practices as anything you do with students, anything. So it can be tier 1 instruction, it can be the way that we present our instruction with students. It can be the way, even how we structure our school. So for this PowerPoint, think about the word intervention as that's anything we do with our students. We also want to help you gain an understanding of the key terms and concepts of the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, tiers of evidence. And then finally, we're going to help you learn to navigate the What Works Clearinghouse website, where much of the research has been collected. When we think about a continuous improvement cycle, believing that all students can grow and all schools can improve, we really look at that as this wheel of continuous improvement. So beginning at the top of identifying your local needs and really looking at your data and determining where you need to provide the most support or the most energy and effort. And then the second step is to select relevant evidence-based practices and interventions. And that's the step we're really going to talk with you about today. We have created this work in conjunction with our school improvement process for our comprehensive school improvement schools and our targeted improvement schools, but this can be used in any school. Again, all students can grow, all schools can improve. There's always something we can be doing. So why is it important to focus on evidence, and why this sudden lurch towards evidence with ESSA? In No Child Left Behind, the words were research-based. And so as long as you had a research-based program or a research-based practice, that was acceptable for federal funds and No Child Left Behind. But there wasn't a focus on what were the outcomes of the research. It's just there is a research base. ESSA uses the words evidence-based, so it goes a step further. To what extent did the outcomes improve, and what are the odds of achieving that desired outcome again? And is it proven with students similar to your population and setting? So it's not just about finding the research, but you have to find the research that matches your school and that has the desired outcomes that you're looking for. So it is a much more stringent approach to using research to identify interventions. There are many things you need to consider, not just a research base, but also local capacity when you're choosing a curriculum, a program, and approach for your schools. So first of all, what resources are required to implement this intervention? You can find a wonderful program, but if you don't have the local resources to implement that program's not going to be helpful. So that's something to consider. Will the potential impact of this intervention justify the cost, or is there a more cost-effective intervention to accomplish the same outcome? And these are good questions to ask ourselves as we're looking at so many programs or working with vendors. What's our local capacity to implement for funding, for staff members? Do they already have the needed skills? And do they have buy-in? Many times leadership teams may have buy-in to a practice or an intervention, but the teachers do not. And so implementation does not always go well. How does this intervention fit into the larger strategic goal and other existing efforts? Again, we can find a program that might have the desired outcomes we want and all the research behind it, but it doesn't really fit into our larger plan or the kinds of things we're already doing. And we have to consider those things when we're talking about full implementation. And then finally, how are we going to sustain this intervention over time? It's one thing to choose something because you have some improvement money or some grant money, but you also have to look at what will we do when the money goes away? How will our teachers have changed? How will our instruction have changed so that we can be sustained and continue to help our students? This is just a very general overview of various federal programs and the evidence requirement that each one of them has. And so for our purposes with the Oklahoma State Department of Ed today, we're focusing on the top one, which is the school improvement and the evidence-based. But you can see that there is an evidence-based requirement for all programs under ESSA. So what is an outcome? Because we talked about with ESSA, the research has to be focused on the outcome. So an outcome is something that can be directly tested and measured quantitatively, things like attendance and test scores, those are outcomes, or qualitatively, such as a measure of school climate, how comfortable are students in school, those are qualitative questions. The outcome is the effect of the intervention being studied. The ESSA tiers of evidence. Tier 1 means there is strong evidence. Tier 2, there's moderate evidence. Tier 3 is promising evidence. And Tier 4 is simply that the evidence demonstrates that there's a rationale for it. And there's reasons for all of these tiered levels of evidence, as we'll continue to talk. For terms of school improvement, we require at least Tier 1, 2, or 3 evidence for all use of school improvement, funds. And we require Tier 1 or 2 for our EDGE grant as part of our school improvement process. A Tier 1 intervention, use me. So with these new requirements in ESSA, almost any program that comes out or vendor that might contact you, they're going to absolutely be saying that they're a Tier 1 intervention and they're going to show you the research to support that. That does not mean that that's always true and that you should stop there with your investigation. We're going to have to be good consumers of research in order to make all of this work. So we have to really decide whether a study is well designed and well implemented for Tiers 1 and 2, and that requires a review against the What Works Clearinghouse standards. So we want to talk through those with you today. So some key terms that we kind of need to remember from our college days: treatment group, control group, statistically significant effect, and random assignment. So I want to try to make these a little calmer and not sound quite so statistical right now. But the treatment group, it's just the intervention group. They're the group of kids who gets the intervention, the strategy, the practice, or the program. The control group is a group of students who do not receive it, so that you can compare their growth to see if the treatment was actually what caused the growth, or they all grew at the same rate and it really wasn't about the treatment at all, the intervention at all. Statistically significant effect is that there's a high probability that there is a difference between the two groups because of the intervention. And then random assignment is the method of assigning people or schools or students to the treatment and the control group. It ensures the groups are similar as possible before the intervention, and it has to take place before the groups are formed and before the intervention begins. I'm going over these terms with you because you will see those in the requirements as you look through research in What Works Clearinghouse. So statistically significant effect. For example, third grade students who participated in a new mathematics program had statistically higher standardized test scores than students who did not participate. So the students who did participate in the mathematics program had a mean score of 361. The students who did not participate had a mean score of 352, and there is a 95% chance that that would happen again. That is a statistically significant effect. So a 95% higher chance that there's a difference between the two groups or that there's no difference. This was a statistically sound work. Here's another example. All the intervention students are taught by one teacher. There's no way to distinguish between the effect of the intervention and the effect of the teacher. That's called a confounding factor. So it's a factor other than the intervention that's unique to either the treatment group or the control group. So they're too much alike, and we can't tell exactly what happened if it was the teacher or the intervention. So to determine whether an intervention causes an outcome, we need to be sure the intervention's the only difference. Tier 1, strong evidence. Has to be a well-executed experimental study, a statistically significant favorable effect on a relevant outcome, no overriding negative effects from experimental or quasi-experimental studies, a large multi-site sample, that's very important, and then finally both population and setting in the study are similar to your population and setting at your school. Moderate evidence still has to be well-executed experimental or quasi-experimental study. It has to have a statistically significant favorable effect on a relevant outcome, no overriding negative effects from experimental or quasi-experimental, a large multi-site sample. So far, Tier 1 and Tier 2 are exactly the same, except for the last characteristic. Either population or setting in the study are similar to your population and setting. So in Tier 1, it had to be both population and setting. In Tier 2, it's population or setting. Tier 3 in ESSA is promising evidence, a well-designed and well-implemented correlational study, statistically significant favorable effect on a relevant outcome, no overriding negative effects from experimental or quasi-experimental studies. There is a lot of Tier 3 promising out there. A Tier 3 can also be a study that would not otherwise meet Tier 1 or Tier 2, but does not meet the large multi-site sample or the population setting overlap. And then Tier 4 demonstrates a rationale, and this is a well-specified logic model explaining how the intervention is likely to improve outcomes. And so it's supported by rigorous research in the field, but it hasn't been tested by research. A study would otherwise meet Tier 1, 2, or 3, but it doesn't meet that significant favorable effect requirement, and an effort to study effects is currently or will be underway. And this is an important part of ESSA because the ESSA, the essence of ESSA is to build more research for evidence-based practices. So it's important that we choose some Tier 4 and Tier 3 things to do, but then study them to pair with universities and get more research out there on what works with students. So here is just a flow chart that is basically the same as the last few slides that I've shown you, but it's kind of a one-pager that might help you work your way through some evidence. And so simply asking yourself what kind of study, yes or no, and then following this chart as we go. So I have a little pop quiz, and we're not together today, so it's hard to visit about that. But I do want you to just take a look at this. So this is a program called Quest. It is an experimental, it has an experimental study behind it. The outcome was that it improved general reading achievement. The design was it meets the standard. The outcome was significant and positive. There were no countervailing or negative outcomes. The samplation and population was that the population matched, not the setting, but the population. The sample size was 562, and the setting was multi-site. So with all of that, that would be considered a moderate Tier 2 intervention. If the population and setting had matched, it would have been Tier 1, but this is Tier 2 because it's a population match only. Here's another example of an evidence-based practice of teacher peer coaching and support, where teachers work with one another in the classroom in terms of helping each other become better instructors. An experimental study, the outcome, there was increased instructional effectiveness. The design standard meets standards without reservation. The outcome was significant and positive. There were no negative outcomes. The setting was a match. The sample size was 81, and the setting was multi-site. This would be considered Tier 3 promising because of the sample size of 81. And also, the sample size of 81 and the setting match only doesn't move it into Tier 1 and Tier 2. Mailing home. This is an interesting one to think about. Mailing things home to students, mailing things home to parents. we really have to look at what was the outcome-specific information. So this was an experimental study. What they were trying to have work was decrease absenteeism. So using mailings home to decrease absenteeism. So it did have an outcome. It met the standard. It was significant and positive. There were no negative effects. The population and the setting matched. Large sample size of 1,054, and the setting was at multi-sites, meaning rural, suburban, small, large, all kinds of schools. So for the outcome of decreasing absenteeism, mailing home, it would be considered a Tier 1 or strong intervention. So it's very important to focus on the outcome-specific information. Mailings home might not raise math scores. Mailings home might not help with student writing, but in decreasing absenteeism, there is evidence that that will absolutely work. Texting with parents, another good practice. The outcome was to increase scores on mathematics standardized assessments. Okay, increase scores on mathematics standardized assessments. So the research looked at, will texting with parents help increase math scores on our state test? It met the standard, but with reservations, but the outcomes were not significant at all. No negative effects, large sample size and multi-site, but the outcomes were not significant on raising math scores by texting with parents. So you can have good practices that don't match the outcome that you're looking for. And that's what's important about considering all of these ideas. So that would be, doesn't meet a tier rating at all. Lorraine is now going to visit with you a little bit about how we use our data, how we use databases to find those practices and interventions.
Thanks, Brooke. So as mentioned earlier, the Every Student Succeeds Act calls on educational leaders to deepen their understanding and expand their use of evidence-based decision-making. ESSA also requires that school improvement efforts be rooted in evidence-based practices, strategies, activities, or programs, collectively known as interventions. There are a number of searchable databases that have been developed to provide us with a way to review existing research on interventions, policies, and practices in education. So this user guide and the additional tools and resources we are providing on our school support webpage are intended to help stakeholders navigate through the information and to make evidence-based decisions using the most rigorous research to improve student outcomes. Today we will focus on navigating through What Works Clearinghouse with this user guide. What Works Clearinghouse is an initiative of the Institute of Education Sciences at the U.S. Department of Education. WWC only reviews high-quality experimental and quasi-experimental studies, so your team can feel confident to find Tier 1 and Tier 2 studies to make evidence-based decisions for your school. In Section 1, we will start with identifying the intervention. Step 1 will be to access the What Works Clearinghouse website at the link above. This is a view of the opening page. Here you can navigate to different parts of the site using the menu button located at the center of the page. Step 2, you'll select a topic from the Find What Works topic list. Find What Works is an advanced search function that allows you to look at evidence of the effectiveness of interventions reviewed by WWC. On the chalkboard, you will find the topic list. The area you choose can be driven by and should be driven by specific outcomes from your comprehensive needs assessment. Step 3, you'll click on Find Research with Students Like Yours. Step 4, here's where you can start to build a profile for your school by selecting grade levels, race, ethnicity, and urbanicity. Be sure to click Done to save. Step 5, you'll sort the students by clicking Students Like Yours label in the header role. Please note that the 3 green ovals, when you see 3 green ovals, that will represent research that was conducted with students very similar to yours. 2 green ovals will indicate the research was conducted with students similar to yours, and 1 green oval indicates that the research was not conducted with students similar to yours. Step 6, you'll review the results to select an intervention. Use the guidelines list to determine if the intervention meets ESSA evidence criteria for levels 1, 2, or 4. You will not find level 3 evidence on What Works Clearinghouse. So again, ESSA level 1 will have a colored icon with a box around it if there's a positive or potentially positive finding. In this example, you see a symbol for literacy as a book. You will also see 3 green ovals that represent the research was conducted with students very similar to yours. ESSA level 2 interventions with a colored icon and 2 color ovals are likely to be level 2 evidence, and ESSA level 4 will have a colored icon and just 1 colored oval that indicates research was not conducted with students similar to yours. Most of the research on the page that you see consists of interventions that have evidence for effectiveness for literacy outcomes. You'll note when you do the search at the top of the page, you can see the number of interventions listed, and just below that, you'll see a small filter to indicate the results are for literacy. Each row represents 1 intervention and lists the grades that were included in the research for that intervention. At the front of each row, there's a symbol, and for literacy, it's a book. The symbol will be colored and have a box around it if there's a positive or potentially positive finding in the area. You can hover over the book to see this. As you scroll, you can see there are dozens of interventions with positive or potentially positive findings. If the symbol is gray, this indicates other evidence, including mixed effects and negative effects. Section 2 is where we'll start to verify the evidence level. So step 1, you'll select the intervention from the list. Step 2, you'll identify the desired outcomes domain and select the underlined phrase. So here there'll be a number, so it may be 3 studies that meet the standards, or it could be 2 studies meet standards. Please note that if the intervention you selected does not have a list of studies, that means that the intervention is not supported by evidence. Go back to the list and select a different intervention. Step 3, you'll select the citation with the highest students like yours rating indicated by the green ovals. Section 3 will review the study. So step 1 is to select the findings from the menu bar and view the improvement index to ensure that the intervention has demonstrated improvement in student outcomes. If it does not demonstrate positive effects on student outcomes, it does not meet the evidence criteria. Step 2, you'll select sample characteristics from the menu bar to ensure that the study reflects your student population and setting. Step 3, if the study meets the desired evidence level, document the source of the study and citation to support the selection of the intervention. Here we have provided a practice scenario for you and your team, and we encourage you to complete this together to learn how to navigate What Works Clearinghouse website. So Brooke's going to go over evidence-based practices at this time.
Thank you, Lorraine. So Lorraine walked you through how to find a program on What Works Clearinghouse, but there are also practices. For instance, when we were going through our pop quiz, there was a practice of texting parents or mailing home or teacher coaching, peer coaching. So those aren't programs that you buy, but they're practices that you do. So we also need to look at how can we find the research for those practices. So on the What Works Clearinghouse, on the front page, at the bottom in the middle, you see quick links. And you can click on the practice guide quick links, and it takes you to a page that looks like this. They each have a title. So from your comprehensive needs assessment, you know the kind of thing you're looking at. We're looking to prevent dropout, or we're looking to raise math scores. So you can find the appropriate practice guide. And you also want to look at when that practice guide was released and try to stay within a 10-year window. So for instance, if we select the Preventing Dropout in Secondary Schools, all of the practice guides will look just like this. So in the right-hand corner, there'll be a PDF that you can download for the entire practice guide to read through, but the recommendations will be right here on the front page. So it will show you if it is minimal, moderate, strong, moderate, moderate evidence. I don't know why that one says it that way, sorry. So minimal evidence would be considered tier 3 or promising, moderate evidence tier 2, and strong evidence tier 3. We have created a resource for you that takes all of that work from the practice guides and puts it in one place. And so I want to walk you through how you can look at what we've created for you, and that link will appear later. So for instance, if what you're working on is foundational skills to support reading for understanding in kindergarten through 3rd grade, so foundational skills in our youngest readers, there are 4 recommendations. The first one, teach students academic language, including the use of inferential and narrative language and vocabulary knowledge, has minimal evidence or tier 3 evidence. Whereas the practice of teaching students academic language skills is a good practice, there's just not strong or moderate evidence for it for increasing foundational skills in readers K through 3. There might be strong evidence for that for teaching students academic language and use of inferential and narrative language and vocabulary knowledge for EL students, perhaps in another grade, but not for foundational skills. So we really have to take a look at these very carefully. Here's another one for improving mathematical problem solving in grades 4 through 8. Minimal evidence for preparing problems and using them in whole class instruction. Minimal evidence that will actually improve mathematical problem solving. It might prove mathematical computation. We would have to look at another study for that, but it doesn't have strong or moderate evidence for increasing mathematical problem solving. Here's an example from teaching academic content and literacy to English learners. So here again is our same recommendation about teaching a set of academic vocabulary words, and there is strong evidence that will help our English learners. Here's one about preventing dropout in secondary schools. There are 4 recommendations. 3 of them have strong or moderate evidence. Engaging students by offering curricula and programs that connect schoolwork with college and career success and improve students' capacity to manage challenges in and out of school. That's the one with strong evidence. So we have many clearinghouses that we can look at. We walked you through the What Works clearinghouse. There are other ones, and there are links for these here. They aren't quite as extensive at What Works as What Works, and when you use a clearinghouse other than What Works, you still have to keep in mind the review process for tiers 1, 2, and 3 within the What Works clearinghouse. So you've got to go back to those slides that show the level of evidence that each has to have and work through those requirements. Currently, the What Works Clearinghouse and the evidence for ESSA are aligned with ESSA requirements. The others aren't necessarily aligned, and you would have to do that alignment yourself. Remember that just because a practice is reviewed on a clearinghouse doesn't mean that it meets those requirements, and you do have to do some analysis yourself. And of course, we are your support for that, but we also want you to understand that just because something says it's tier 1 doesn't make it tier 1, or just because it says it's tier 3 does not make it tier 3. You still have to do that review. We know that many of you work with external providers in your school improvement process or in just general in how you organize professional development. And we want to be sure that you have some resources for how those external providers can also help you meet these tiers of evidence. There still needs to be a review process. So we've taken some recommendations adapted from the Guide to Working with External Providers from the American Institute for Research, or we refer to as AIR. And we wanted to provide some support for you, for those of you that might be hiring external providers. So let's take a look at how we work with our providers. First of all, some critical characteristics of high-quality provider services, and this is from AIR. They've got to show that the work they're doing aligns with your established SMART goals and that they have long-term strategies for school improvement. A customized approach as defined by your comprehensive needs assessment, your SMART goals, and your action plan. And I think this is sometimes where an external provider might say, we can do this for you, but what we really need to turn that around and say, here are our goals, what can you do to help us meet those goals? Evidence-based services that meet Tier 1, 2, or 3 criteria. So, for instance, if they are going to work with you on peer coaching, then they have to show that they understand in what situations peer coaching will improve instruction. High-quality provider services build capacity with leaders, teachers, and school personnel to carry out and continue the scope of the work in the future. A provider shows within a certain amount of time, this is the capacity we will build within your school. Professional development must match and support SMART goals and action steps, and stakeholder engagement. They need to have a piece in their proposal for you that shows how they will engage students, parents, teachers, and community members. So in terms of choosing a high-quality provider, you really need to think about you are in the driver's seat and you want to have the provider prove these characteristics to you. To help you with that, we have created an external provider rubric as a way for you to look at the proposal they're giving you and rate that proposal. So if we look at the entire rubric, there are 10 things on the rubric. We've been talking quite a bit about evidence-based today, so I wanted to point out there is an evidence-based line on this rubric so that you can think of anything scoring in a 4, that provider is going to be good for you. Anything in the yellow might mean maybe, maybe not. And in the red really means that the provider doesn't really meet your needs and you really should not be using them. We would recommend that you use this rubric to help you look through provider proposals. Again, this rubric gives you 10 different characteristics to look at, and we focused a lot on evidence-based today. You really do need to review your external providers each year to see if they have met what they've promised you they will do, and to also look at, is this working for us? And so hopefully this rubric is something that you can use year to year. We want to thank you for joining us today in talking about ESSA tiers of evidence and how you can use those tiers of evidence to choose appropriate instructional practices and interventions. We want to thank Rail Southwest for this partnership, and particularly Aaron Butler, who was our consultant through Rail Southwest, to help us put all of these ideas together and provide this training for you. Thank you.